The manager attacked the cashier in front of everyone, until a strange person approached, and for a heartbeat, the entire supermarket froze in a stunned, electric silence. Customers clutched their shopping baskets mid-step. The distant hum of refrigerators became unnervingly loud, and the fluorescent lights seemed to cast an even harsher glare over the unfolding chaos. The cashier, a young man with trembling hands and a pale face, had just been yanked forward by the collar. The manager's voice, sharp and venomous, echoed down the aisles. "You think I wouldn't find out? You think you can steal from me?" It wasn't just an accusation. It was a public humiliation, dripping with rage. The young cashier stammered something, but his words were drowned beneath the manager's next outburst. The onlookers shifted uncomfortably, torn between stepping in and staying out of trouble. A mother in aisle 3 pulled her child closer. An elderly man lingered by the cereal shelf, his brow furrowed, but he didn't move. And then, from beyond the crowd, a figure emerged. The stranger walked with deliberate calm, each step echoing as if the tiles beneath their feet were amplifying the moment. Dressed in an unremarkable gray coat, with a small leather bag slung across their chest, they didn't seem imposing, but there was something in the way they moved, something measured and heavy with intention. The manager noticed them and barked, "This isn't your business. Keep walking." But the stranger did not. Instead, they stopped just a few feet away and tilted their head, studying the scene with unnerving stillness. Their eyes, pale, almost silver, swept over the cashier, the manager, and then the silent onlookers. Finally, their gaze returned to the manager. "You're holding him as if you're certain of his guilt," the stranger said, their voice low yet carrying through the air like a ripple. "But are you certain enough to face what happens when you're wrong?" The manager scoffed, tightening his grip on the cashier's shirt. "I caught him red-handed. Money missing from the till. He's the only one who could have taken it." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A shift, like the faint rumble of distant thunder before a storm. "Accusations without proof," the stranger said softly, "are the kind of poison that rots more than reputations. It rots you." The crowd seemed to lean in without meaning to. Even the mother, who had pulled her child close, now found herself staring, her hand slackening on the boy's arm. "Who the hell are you?" the manager demanded, his voice losing some of its edge. "Someone who knows the cost of mistakes like this," the stranger replied. Without warning, the stranger reached into their leather bag. A few gasps rippled through the customers, some expecting something dangerous. But what emerged was not a weapon. It was a small, black notebook, its cover worn and its pages thick with age. The stranger flipped it open with precision, revealing what appeared to be handwritten notes, dates, and strange symbols. They scanned quickly until they found the page they wanted, then turned it toward the manager. "You're missing money," they said, tapping a particular date. "Was removed after your shift ended yesterday." "Not during his." The manager blinked, startled. "What are you talking about? You weren't even here yesterday." "No," the stranger replied evenly. "But I was watching." Somewhere near the dairy section, someone audibly whispered, "What does that even mean?" The stranger took a step closer. "You want to know who took it? Look in the mirror of the camera above aisle 5, and ask yourself why you've been coming in after hours when no one's here." The manager froze. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling camera the stranger had pointed to, then quickly back down. His face was pale now, and his grip on the cashier loosened without him realizing it. The cashier stumbled backward, free at last, his breath ragged. The stranger didn't look at him, only kept their eyes locked on the manager, as if pinning him in place with something sharper than steel. The crowd's silence was different now, no longer stunned by the attack, but transfixed by the shift in power. The stranger closed the notebook slowly, slid it back into the bag, and said, "I suggest you apologize. Here. Now." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The manager's throat bobbed as if he wanted to argue, but the weight of every eye in the room, and the impossible knowledge the stranger had displayed, seemed to crush his resistance. His lips parted, his voice brittle. "I may have been mistaken." "Mistaken," the stranger said, the faintest edge of mockery in their tone. "You nearly ruined him in front of strangers. Use the right word." The manager swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said to the cashier, the words tasting like sand in his mouth. The cashier just stared at him, stunned. The stranger turned away without another glance, walking toward the automatic doors as if the confrontation had never happened. But just before stepping outside, they paused and glanced back over their shoulder. "Careful," they said quietly. with the stories you choose to tell. Sometimes they tell more about you than the one you accuse. And then they were gone. The doors slid shut, and for a moment, the supermarket felt strangely hollow, as though something unseen had just passed through it and left an emptiness in its wake. The cashier still hadn't moved. The customers began to murmur again, but it was different this time, more like the cautious gossip of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. The manager retreated into his office without another word. The cashier, after a long pause, looked toward the doors, his mind racing. That stranger had known things no ordinary person could have known. And as strange as it seemed, he felt certain that this wouldn't be the last time he'd see them. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass doors as if willing them to open again and reveal the gray-coated stranger. The hum of the refrigerators and the soft beeping of a self-checkout in the corner seemed distant, like muffled noises underwater. His chest still rose and fell quickly, adrenaline refusing to leave his system. The other employees were glancing at him now, some with sympathy, others with unease. One of them, a girl from the bakery section named Leah, edged closer. "You okay?" she asked quietly, her eyes darting toward the manager's closed office door. He nodded once, though the truth was far from that. "Yeah," he muttered, voice still shaky. "I think so." Leah lingered for a moment longer, as if she wanted to say something else, but then the arrival of another customer pulled her away. The cashier, Eli, looked back at the office door. He knew the apology had been forced out of the manager, and whatever happened in their next might not be friendly. But strangely, he didn't feel as afraid as he had earlier. Instead, he felt curious. That stranger had known about the missing money, about the after-hours visits, and even about the security camera in aisle 5. It was the way they spoke, the confidence, the precision, like they had walked in already knowing how this scene would unfold. And then there was that notebook, worn from years of use, filled with not just writing but strange symbols. Who were they? He clocked out earlier than usual that evening. As he stepped out into the crisp air, he noticed the faintest trace of cigarette smoke on the breeze. Not fresh, but lingering. For some reason, it reminded him of the stranger's presence. He scanned the parking lot, but there was no sign of the gray coat. The bus stop was quiet when he arrived, save for an older man sitting on the bench with a folded newspaper. Eli sat on the far end, his mind replaying the encounter over and over. He almost didn't notice when a slip of paper fell into his lap. His eyes darted upward, but there was no one close enough to have handed it to him. The older man was still buried in his paper, and a woman with headphones stood a few feet away, looking at her phone. The paper was small, folded twice over. He unfolded it slowly, his pulse quickening. Inside, written in the same precise, slanted handwriting he remembered from the notebook, were 2 lines. "Truth rarely arrives when you expect it. Be at the corner of 7th and Maynard. Midnight. No name. No explanation." He folded it back up and slipped it into his jacket pocket, his mind spinning. 100 sensible thoughts told him not to go. That it was dangerous. That it was insane to meet a stranger who had just dismantled his boss in front of a crowd. And yet, under those warnings, there was something else. An itch. A pull toward answers. That night, he couldn't concentrate on anything. The small apartment he lived in felt tighter than usual, every tick of the wall clock dragging toward midnight. He sat on his couch, then paced, then sat again. The folded note seemed to burn against his leg, as though the ink carried heat. At 11:45, he left. The streets were quiet, the pools of light from street lamps casting long, dark stretches between them. 7th and Maynard was an old intersection in the quieter part of town, where half the buildings were shuttered businesses and the rest were apartments with faded paint. He saw the figure before he reached the corner. They were leaning against a lamppost, the same gray coat hanging loosely over their shoulders. In the dim light, their features seemed even sharper than he remembered, as though the shadows themselves had been drawn to outline them. "You came," the stranger said, not looking surprised. "You didn't exactly give me much choice," Eli replied cautiously. "Everyone has a choice. But curiosity," they gave a faint smile. "Curiosity makes liars of us when we pretend we can ignore it." Eli crossed his arms. "Why me? Why that scene in the store?" The stranger tilted their head slightly, as though weighing how much to reveal. "Because, Eli, some people get caught in storms they don't deserve. You were about to drown in one. And you just happened to be there to stop it?" "Not exactly." They reached into their coat again and pulled out the notebook. Opening it to a fresh page, They held it so Eli could see. His own name was written there, beneath it, a date, August 3rd, 2021. That, the stranger said, tapping the date, was the first time you were marked. Marked? Eli's voice tightened. For what? For being watched, they said simply. By someone who doesn't want you to realize you matter in ways you can't yet understand. Eli blinked. This is insane. You're talking like this is, I don't know, some spy movie. The stranger closed the notebook. It's not a movie, and you'll find out soon enough that reality often feels stranger than fiction when someone peels back the curtain. They started walking, gesturing for him to follow. Against his better judgment, he did. They led him down Maynard Street, their pace unhurried, as though they had all the time in the world. The only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional buzz of a flickering street lamp. Finally, they stopped in front of an abandoned corner store. Its windows were boarded, and the sign above the door was so faded it was unreadable. This, they said, is where your next choice happens. Before Eli could ask what that meant, the stranger produced a key from their coat and unlocked the rusted door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of dust and something else. Old paper, maybe. The interior was nothing like the outside suggested. The moment they stepped in, Eli saw that the walls were lined with shelves filled with more of those black notebooks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Every one of them was labeled with a name and a date. What is this place? Eli asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Records, the stranger said simply. Not the kind you can find in government archives or on any computer. These are the truths that are hidden, intentionally or otherwise. Each book is a person's story, marked from the moment they become important. Eli's eyes scanned the shelves. Names in languages he didn't recognize. Dates going back decades. And mine's in here somewhere, he said. The stranger nodded. It is. But opening it means you can't go back to who you were before. Eli hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. And if I don't? The stranger's gaze was steady. Then someone else will write your story for you. Somewhere deep inside, Eli already knew he was going to say yes. Eli stood before the shelves, rows upon rows of black spines staring back at him like a silent jury. The stranger didn't rush him, didn't pressure him, just waited, still as a shadow. The faint hum of a street lamp outside seeped in through a crack in the boarded window, a reminder that the world beyond this place was still turning, still unaware of what secrets breathed here. He stepped forward, scanning the labels until he found it, his name, printed in precise, sharp lettering. The date beneath it sent a shiver through him. It wasn't just the day the stranger had mentioned. There was another date, written smaller, in a hand that looked almost hesitant. It was today's date. What does this mean? Eli asked, his voice a notch above a whisper. The stranger didn't answer directly. It means your story is still being written. And today is a chapter someone, somewhere, was determined to erase before it began. Eli reached for the book, his fingers brushing against the rough texture of the cover. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Opening it could mean answers, but answers came with consequences. When he finally pulled it free and opened to the first page, his breath caught. There, in flowing ink, were events from his life. Not just the obvious moments, but things no one else could have known. His thoughts, his fears, moments when he had stood on the edge of a decision and swayed between two futures. It was all there, laid bare like someone had been living inside his mind. But halfway through the book, the pages changed. The handwriting shifted, becoming jagged, desperate. Words were crossed out, entire paragraphs rewritten in a frantic scrawl. And in the margins, in red ink, a single phrase appeared over and over. He must not see the end. Eli's pulse thundered in his ears. Who wrote this? Who's trying to stop me? The stranger stepped closer, their eyes sharp and cold. Someone who has been shaping stories for longer than you can imagine. Someone who understands that controlling the ending is the same as controlling the person. They've done it to hundreds of lives in these books. Erased truths, rewritten fates. You were next. Eli flipped toward the final pages. There was a sudden blankness, a jarring void where his future should have been recorded. Just a few lines, scrawled in a trembling hand. Outcome decided. Erasure imminent. The air in the room seemed to thicken. So, if this ending stays the way it is, you disappear, the stranger finished for him. Not just from the world, but from memory. No one remembers you existed. The shelves will hold your story, but only as an empty shell. It's the cleanest way to kill someone, without killing them at all. A cold dread settled over Eli, but beneath it was a flicker of defiance. Then how do I change it? The stranger's lips curved in the faintest smile. You write it yourself. They handed him a pen, its weight surprisingly heavy. But understand this, once you write, your story is yours alone. No one can protect you from what it brings. Power always attracts the ones who would take it from you. Eli stared at the blank page, the pen trembling slightly in his hand. For a moment, he thought of walking away, pretending none of this existed. But he remembered the way the manager's hand had gripped his shirt, the humiliation burning in his chest, and how a stranger had appeared at the exact moment he needed them. That hadn't been luck. It had been choice. He lowered the pen to the page. The first word felt like breaking through ice. The second came faster. And soon, sentences poured out, his truth unfiltered, raw. Moments of pain and moments of hope. Choices he'd made, and ones he still feared to face. As the ink spread, the room seemed to hum faintly, as though the shelves themselves were aware of what was happening. When he wrote the final sentence, a sudden stillness filled the air, deep and absolute. The stranger took the book from his hands and closed it with deliberate care, sliding it back into its place on the shelf. It's done, they said softly. No one can take it from you now. Eli exhaled, feeling a strange weight lift from his chest. But the relief was short-lived, because in the distance, beyond the boarded windows, he heard the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Slow, measured, approaching. The stranger's expression shifted, becoming sharper. They found us faster than I thought. Who? Eli asked, his stomach tightening. The one who's been writing over your life. And they don't come alone. In an instant, the stranger crossed the room, pulling a thick metal bolt across the door. We have to move. Now. They led him toward the back of the store, through a narrow hallway lined with more shelves. Eli caught glimpses of other books with unfamiliar symbols and locks instead of spines. At the very end was a door he hadn't noticed before, its surface covered in deep, deliberate carvings. The stranger unlocked it, and a rush of cold night air hit him. Outside was a narrow alley that seemed impossibly quiet compared to the approaching steps on the other side of the building. As they stepped out, Eli glanced back into the archive. For just a second, he thought he saw movement, like shadows peeling away from the walls, gathering into a shape that wasn't entirely human. The stranger caught his glance. Don't look back. Not tonight. They moved quickly, cutting through side streets until they emerged into a part of the city Eli barely recognized. Finally, when the sounds of pursuit had faded, the strangers stopped beneath a flickering street lamp. This isn't over, they said, fixing him with a gaze that seemed to see far beyond the moment. You've taken control of your story, but that makes you a threat. They will try again. They always do. Eli swallowed, his voice low. Then teach me how to stop them. The stranger studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the weight of the request. Then slowly they nodded. You'll learn. But understand this, you can't go back to your old life. Once you see the threads, you can't pretend they aren't there. Every word you speak, every choice you make from here on matters. A faint breeze rustled through the street, carrying with it the distant hum of a city that would wake tomorrow, unaware of the battle that had just begun in its shadows. Eli felt the note in his pocket, still folded, still warm from the heat of his body. He realized it was more than just an invitation. It was a summons, and he had answered. The stranger stepped back, melting into the dim light as if they'd been born from it. Midnight tomorrow, they said. And bring the pen. You'll need it. And then they were gone. Eli stood alone under the flickering lamp, his pulse steady now, the fear replaced by something else. Resolve. Somewhere in the city, the ones who had tried to erase him were regrouping, plotting their next move. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't just waiting for things to happen to him. He had the pen. He had the truth. And he was ready to write the rest himself.